In the early 1970s, the small community of Hinsdale, New York, was surrounded by forests and quiet roads. Away from the city stood an old farmhouse, an ordinary place to begin a new life. The farmhouse was old, weathered, and surrounded by dense woodland. Nothing about the property suggested what would later make it infamous. To the family who came to live there, it was simply a home. The Dandy family moved in hoping to make a home. Phil and Clara brought their children and belongings to the property, focusing on the ordinary tasks of unpacking and settling in. Inside, the farmhouse slowly began to feel like theirs. For a while, there was nothing to suggest that the house would become associated with one of New York's most famous paranormal stories. As evening came, the farmhouse changed. Inside, the family continued with an ordinary evening. But in an old house surrounded by woodland, every unfamiliar sound could suddenly feel much closer than it really was. The strange occurrences were no longer isolated. According to the family's accounts, the activity became more frequent and disturbing. What had once been unsettling was becoming a serious source of fear. Lights were reportedly switching on and off without explanation. At first, these could have had ordinary causes, but when unusual events happen repeatedly, even the simplest explanation begins to feel less convincing. Phil began paying closer attention. He checked the rooms and the switches, looking for an ordinary explanation. But not every incident seemed easy to dismiss. The strange sounds did not disappear. According to the family, noises seemed to come from different parts of the property. Repeated disturbances were becoming harder for the family to ignore. Eventually, the reports became more disturbing. The family described seeing figures or apparitions inside the house. For those who believed they saw something, the farmhouse was no longer an ordinary home. Experiences like these change how people perceive a space. A hallway that seemed harmless during daylight could feel threatening after dark. Fear began changing the way the family experienced their own home. The family began checking rooms whenever something unusual happened. Sometimes they found nothing. That absence of evidence could be reassuring, but it also meant there was no clear explanation. The reported activity also affected the children. Hearing that their children are frightened by something they cannot explain is another level of fear for parents like Phil and Clara. For Phil and Clara, the most troubling part was the effect on their children. Rooms that should have felt safe were becoming places the children were increasingly reluctant to enter alone. Then came reports of something stranger. The family described hearing unusual sounds from the woods, including what they believed was chanting. Beyond the windows stood only trees and silence. The woods became another source of unease. The family had already reported strange sounds, and the darkness made it impossible to see very far. Whatever was making the noises, they could not identify it. Among the most disturbing claims was the sound of chanting. They were left listening from the edge of the property, unable to determine if the sound came from people, animals, or something else. Phil searched for practical explanations, while Clara's concern continued to grow. The question was becoming impossible to avoid. What was happening inside the house? Some accounts described objects moving without anyone touching them. Each incident added another layer to their belief that something inside the farmhouse was responsible. Eventually, the family began looking beyond the house for answers. They needed someone who could determine whether there was a practical explanation or whether the events had another cause. The family turned to the church. A priest was brought to the property to address what they believed was happening. His arrival marked a major change. The family was no longer alone. Inside, the priest was confronted with the environment the family described. For the Dandies, this visit represented something they desperately wanted: an end to the fear inside their home. Accounts described the priest performing a religious cleansing. The family believed intervention was necessary, but they later claimed that the strange activity did not simply disappear. According to the family, the intervention did not bring an end to the disturbances. Their farmhouse had become a place they no longer felt safe calling home. After years of reported disturbances, they left the farmhouse. The house that once represented a quieter life had become inseparable from fear and experiences they could not explain. The Dandies were not the last to occupy the property. Over time, its story became larger than the family who first made it famous, developing a reputation that followed every occupant. Eventually, the property deteriorated. A place once occupied by families was becoming an abandoned structure surrounded by the same woods that had already become part of its legend. Then the story entered a new chapter. Paranormal investigator Dan Klaes acquired the property and restored it for research, returning to the same rooms where the original reports began. Today, investigators continue searching for evidence. Cameras record empty rooms, devices monitor the silence. But an investigation can record an unexplained event without proving what caused it.